It was a Tuesday, a day like any other, or so it seemed. The fluorescent hum of the second-hand bookstore in downtown Portland usually brought a comforting sense of predictability to Arthur Penhaligon. He wasn't a man given to grand gestures or sudden impulses. His life was a quiet tapestry of routine. Morning coffee, a walk to the store he'd owned for 30 years, the familiar scent of aging paper and forgotten stories. Yet, on this particular Tuesday, the fabric of that carefully woven existence began to unravel, not with a violent tear, but with the gentle, insidious tug of a loose thread. Arthur, a man in his late 50s with eyes that held the quiet wisdom of countless read pages and a gentle smile that rarely faltered, was in his usual spot, perched precariously on a wobbly stool, cataloging a recent acquisition. It was a first edition of The Great Gatsby, a true gem, its dust jacket surprisingly intact. He ran his calloused fingers over the embossed title, appreciating the craftsmanship of a bygone era. It was then, tucked deep within the pages between chapters 7 and 8, that he found it. Not a bookmark, not a pressed flower, but a single, folded piece of brittle, yellowed paper. His first thought was annoyance. Customers often used scraps as makeshift bookmarks, a habit he found mildly irritating. He unfolded it, intending to discard it without a second glance. But the neat, almost calligraphic handwriting, faded with time but still legible, stopped him. It wasn't a grocery list or a casual note. It was an address, a street name and number, followed by a city and state. 1724, Whisperwood Lane, Willow Creek, Ohio. There was no name, no context, just this lone, cryptic address. Arthur wasn't one to dwell on trifles. His mind, usually a well-ordered library of literary facts and sales figures, instinctively dismissed it as a relic, perhaps from a previous owner, an innocuous piece of ephemera. He considered tossing it into the recycling bin, but something, a flicker of curiosity he rarely indulged, made him pause. Why would someone tuck a simple address so meticulously into such a valuable book? It wasn't a common practice. He slipped it into his pocket, a small, inconsequential secret, and returned to his work, the scent of aged paper suddenly imbued with a faint, unsettling whisper. The next few days were business as usual. Customers drifted in and out, seeking solace in the dusty aisles, the comforting rhythm of transactions filling the silence. Yet, the address, a tiny, parchment ghost, began to haunt the periphery of Arthur's thoughts. It was a whisper he couldn't quite silence, an itch he couldn't quite scratch. He found himself idly searching for Willow Creek, Ohio, on his old desktop computer during quiet moments. It was a small, unassuming town, nestled in the heart of rural America, a world away from the bustling streets of Portland. The sheer randomness of it gnawed at him. The Great Gatsby had traveled across decades, perhaps across continents, before landing on his shelf. To find such a specific personal detail within its pages felt less like a coincidence and more like a deliberate act, a message waiting to be discovered. He considered the possibilities: a lost love, a forgotten friend, a secret rendezvous. His imagination, usually reserved for the narratives within the books he sold, began to construct its own elaborate theories. He was a man of logic, of tangible facts, but this felt different. It felt charged with an unspoken history. One evening, after the bookstore's heavy oak door was locked for the night and the streetlights cast long, dancing shadows through the dusty windows, Arthur found himself staring at the address again. The handwriting was elegant, almost artistic, with a distinctive flourish on the capital W of Whisperwood. It was the handwriting of someone who took care with their penmanship, someone who perhaps valued order and precision. This wasn't a hastily scribbled note. It was a carefully recorded detail. He tried to rationalize his growing obsession. He was a creature of habit, and this was a deviation, an anomaly in his perfectly predictable universe. Perhaps it was the boredom of routine, the subtle yearning for something beyond the familiar pages that filled his days. Or perhaps, deep down, he was searching for a connection, a thread that would weave a new pattern into his solitary life. His wife, Eleanor, had passed away 5 years prior, leaving a void that even the most compelling narratives couldn't quite fill. He had built his life around the store, around the quiet solace of literature, but there was an undeniable emptiness, a lingering echo in the silent rooms of his home. The address became a silent companion, a persistent question mark in the quiet of his evenings. He started to feel a strange, almost magnetic pull towards it. It wasn't just an address anymore. It was a doorway, a potential portal to a story far more compelling than any he had ever read. He found himself wondering about the person who had written it, the person who had tucked it away. What was their life like? Why was this address so significant to them that they would entrust it to the silent keeping of a beloved book? He finally admitted to himself that he couldn't just let it go. It was a tiny, nagging thorn in his otherwise orderly existence. The rational part of his brain told him it was foolish, a wild goose chase based on nothing more than an old piece of paper. But another part, a deeply buried, adventurous part he rarely acknowledged, urged him forward. There was a sense of destiny about it, a feeling that this particular book with this particular address had found its way to him for a reason. He decided he would make a few inquiries, just a few, to satisfy his curiosity. Nothing drastic, nothing that would disrupt the quiet equilibrium of his life. He would start online with public records, perhaps a quick search for the address itself. He had no expectations, no grand illusions of uncovering a hidden treasure or a long-lost secret. He simply wanted to understand the context, to satisfy the persistent whisper in his mind. But as he typed 1724, Whisperwood Lane, Willow Creek, Ohio into the search bar, a strange unease began to settle over him. It wasn't just curiosity anymore. It was something more primal, a premonition of something vast and unforeseen. The quiet hum of his computer seemed to deepen, the glowing screen illuminating the faint lines of worry etched around his eyes. He felt as if he was standing on the precipice of an unknown landscape, a silent, swirling vortex of possibilities that could either bring him peace or plunge him into a profound, unimaginable sorrow. The address, a simple string of numbers and letters, suddenly felt like a key, not just to a location, but to a past, a truth, that was waiting to be unlocked. And Arthur, a man of books and quiet routines, was about to become an unwilling protagonist in a story far stranger than fiction. The initial online searches yielded frustratingly little. 1724 Whisperwood Lane, Willow Creek, Ohio, brought up a generic map, a satellite image of a quiet residential street lined with mature trees and modest homes. There were no immediate real estate listings, no obvious business registrations, no tantalizing clues that screamed mystery. Arthur found himself squinting at the screen, as if by sheer force of will he could conjure a hidden history from the pixels. The silence of the internet was almost deafening, a stark contrast to the persistent hum in his own mind. He tried variations, searching for historical residence, property deeds, anything that might connect the address to a name, a family, a narrative. But Willow Creek was a small town, and its digital footprint seemed as elusive as a phantom limb. The more he searched, the more the silence amplified, and the more a strange sense of foreboding began to creep in. It wasn't just a lack of information. It felt like an absence, a deliberate void where something should have been. One evening, staring at the faded handwriting of the address, a new thought struck him. The book, The Great Gatsby, had been a first edition, a rare and valuable copy. Where had it come from? Arthur's acquisition process was usually meticulous, involving detailed provenance checks for high-value items. But this particular copy, if he remembered correctly, had come in a bulk purchase from an estate sale, a box of old novels he'd barely glanced at before shelving. It was an oversight he now regretted, a missing link in a chain that was growing increasingly complex. He scoured his old invoices, a dusty collection of carbon copies and faded receipts, until he found the record for the estate sale. It was for a Mrs. Evelyn Thorne, a woman he vaguely remembered as a reclusive figure who had passed away in her early 90s. Her home, a crumbling Victorian on the outskirts of Portland, had been filled with an astonishing collection of books, most of them unremarkable, but a few, like the Gatsby, rare finds. He remembered the house, a place that felt frozen in time, heavy with unspoken stories. This was a lead, a fragile thread connecting the book to a specific person. Could Evelyn Thorne have owned the book all these years? Was the address hers? Or was it someone else's? A secret she had kept for decades? Arthur felt a prickle of anticipation, a nervous energy he hadn't felt in years. He knew, instinctively, that Evelyn Thorne held a piece of this puzzle. But Evelyn Thorne was gone, her secrets buried with her. He decided to visit the house. The Victorian, now empty and awaiting demolition, stood like a ghost on a windswept hill. He stood outside the chain-link fence, the condemned sign swaying mournfully in the breeze. The windows, dark and vacant, seemed to stare back at him, holding their silent vigil. He imagined Evelyn Thorne, a woman he knew little about, living out her days surrounded by these very books, perhaps one of them holding the key to a truth she had carried for a lifetime. The air grew heavy with unspoken histories, with the weight of decades of secrets. As he drove away, a new thought materialized. What if the address wasn't a residence? What if it was something else? A business? A library? A hidden vault? The dramatic flair of his imagination, usually confined to the pages of detective novels, was now running wild. He pulled over, his mind racing. He needed more. He needed to talk to someone who knew Evelyn Thorne. He remembered the estate lawyer, a young man named Marcus Thorne, a distant relative Evelyn had named as executor. Marcus had been efficient, professional, and entirely detached from the emotional weight of his task. Arthur tracked him down through the firm's website, his fingers hesitating over the phone keypad. This was a direct inquiry, a step beyond casual curiosity. He rehearsed his questions. I found an address in a book purchased from Mrs. Thorne's estate. Do you know anything about it? It sounded flimsy, almost ridiculous. He finally dialed. Marcus Thorne's voice was polite but brisk. When Arthur explained the situation, there was a pause on the other end, a silence that felt heavy with unspoken meaning. An address, you say? Marcus's voice was carefully neutral. I don't recall Mrs. Thorne ever mentioning anything of the sort. Her affairs were quite private. Arthur pressed on, describing the book, the handwriting. Marcus sighed. Look, Mr. Penhaligon, Mrs. Thorne was an old woman, reclusive. She had her eccentricities. It's probably nothing. A forgotten note. An old address she never used. He sounded dismissive, eager to close the conversation. But the book was a first edition, Arthur insisted. And the address was tucked away so carefully. Another pause. Well, Marcus said, his voice now tinged with a hint of annoyance. I suppose if it's that important to you, you could try the local historical society in Willow Creek. My great-aunt did have some distant family ties there, I believe. But I really wouldn't get your hopes up. Distant family ties. The words resonated. A small, hopeful chime in the silence. This was it. This was the thread. He thanked Marcus, his heart thrumming with a renewed sense of purpose. The Historical Society. It was a long shot, but it was a shot. The drive to Willow Creek, Ohio, was a journey into the heart of rural America. Lush green fields gave way to rolling hills, small towns with their lone gas stations and sleepy main streets dotting the landscape. The further he drove from the familiar hustle of Portland, the more a sense of quiet apprehension settled over him. He was a man of books, not of daring expeditions. Yet, here he was, chasing a ghost, a whisper of a secret from a forgotten past. He arrived in Willow Creek on a surprisingly crisp autumn afternoon. The town was exactly as he'd imagined from the satellite images. Quaint, quiet, a place where time seemed to slow down. The Historical Society was housed in an old, red brick building, its windows gleaming in the afternoon sun. Inside, the air was thick with the scent of old paper and dust, a scent that was strangely comforting to Arthur. He was met by a spry, silver-haired woman named Eleanor Vance, the Society's enthusiastic curator. She had a kind smile and eyes that sparkled with a genuine love for local history. Arthur, feeling a little foolish, explained his unusual quest, showing her the faded address. Eleanor's eyes widened slightly as she examined the handwriting. Well, isn't this interesting? She murmured. a hint of genuine intrigue in her voice. 1724 Whisperwood Lane. That address has been connected to the Miller family for generations. One of the oldest families in Willow Creek, actually. Miller family. The name hung in the air, thick with unspoken possibilities. "Do you know anything about an Evelyn Thorne?" Arthur asked, his voice barely a whisper. Eleanor's brow furrowed in thought. Thorne. The name sounds familiar. Ah, yes. There was a brief marriage many, many years ago. A young woman from the Miller family, a girl named Sarah Miller, married a man named Thomas Thorne. But it was a very brief union, ended tragically. And I believe Sarah. She moved away shortly after. Sarah Miller. Thomas Thorne. A tragic union. A shiver ran down Arthur's spine. The pieces, disparate and scattered, were slowly, painstakingly beginning to coalesce. The narrative was becoming clearer, darker. Evelyn Thorne, the reclusive old woman, and Sarah Miller, a young woman whose life was touched by tragedy. What was the connection? What secret did the address hold? The questions multiplied, each one more urgent, more insistent. Arthur knew, with a chilling certainty, that he was on the verge of something profound, something that would irrevocably alter the quiet tapestry of his life. Eleanor Vance, sensing the profound gravity of Arthur's quest, led him to a dusty corner of the Historical Society, where old family registers and brittle newspaper clippings were meticulously preserved. She was a fount of local knowledge, her memory a living archive of Willow Creek's past. As she sifted through yellow documents, the story of the Miller family began to emerge, a saga interwoven with the very fabric of the town. The Miller family, Eleanor explained, had been prosperous farmers, their roots in Willow Creek stretching back to the early 19th century. They were known for their resilience, their quiet dignity, and their deep connection to the land. But like all families, they had their share of sorrows, their own hidden tragedies. Eleanor finally found it. A faded newspaper clipping from the Willow Creek Gazette, dated 1968. The headline, stark and chilling, read, "Local woman disappears without a trace." Below it, a grainy photograph of a young woman with kind, luminous eyes and a faint, almost shy smile. Sarah Miller. The article detailed her disappearance, the frantic search, the baffling lack of clues. She had simply vanished one crisp autumn morning, leaving behind a bewildered family and a town steeped in unanswered questions. Arthur's heart pounded in his chest. Sarah Miller. The same Sarah Miller who had briefly married Thomas Thorne. The same Sarah Miller whose family had lived at 1724 Whisperwood Lane. The puzzle pieces, once so scattered, were now snapping into place with an unnerving precision. Evelyn Thorne, the reclusive old woman from Portland, had been connected to this tragedy. Was she Sarah's sister? A distant cousin? The question hung in the air, heavy with unspoken implications. Eleanor continued to search, her fingers tracing lines of text in an old family Bible. "Ah, here it is," she announced, her voice a little softer now. Sarah Miller. Born 1947. Married Thomas Thorne, 1965. No children listed. She paused, her eyes scanning the next entry. And her sister, Evelyn Miller. Born 1945. Evelyn Miller. It clicked into place with the force of a physical blow. Evelyn Miller was Evelyn Thorne. She must have changed her surname after marrying, or perhaps later, to distance herself from a painful past. Sarah Miller was Evelyn's sister, and the address, 1724 Whisperwood Lane, was their childhood home. The book, the cherished first edition of Gatsby, must have been a memento, a tangible link to a life that had been abruptly, tragically interrupted. The gravity of the situation settled upon Arthur. This wasn't just a simple address. It was a silent scream from the past, a desperate plea for recognition. He felt a profound sense of responsibility, a duty to uncover the truth, not just for his own curiosity, but for the memory of Sarah Miller, a woman whose disappearance had remained an open wound for decades. Was there ever any resolution to Sarah's disappearance? Arthur asked, his voice hoarse. Eleanor shook her head, a somber expression on her face. Never. The police investigated, of course. They even brought in state detectives. But there was nothing. No body, no ransom note, no credible witnesses. It was as if she simply evaporated. The family was devastated. Her parents never recovered. And Evelyn. She left Willow Creek shortly after, never really looking back. A cold knot of dread tightened in Arthur's stomach. Evelyn, leaving Willow Creek, carrying a secret, a sorrow, for decades. Was she running from something? Or was she protecting something? The possibilities were endless, each one more chilling than the last. The dramatic, almost theatrical nature of the unsolved disappearance. The beloved book holding the key. It felt like something ripped from the pages of a Gothic novel. Arthur asked about Thomas Thorne, Sarah's husband. Eleanor frowned. Thomas Thorne was a bit of an enigma. He was new to Willow Creek, a drifter, really. He worked odd jobs. After Sarah disappeared, he seemed to vanish as well. No one ever heard from him again. A drifter. Vanished after his wife disappeared. The pieces were forming a terrifying picture. Was Thomas Thorne involved? Was he responsible for Sarah's disappearance? The theory, once a mere whisper, now screamed in Arthur's mind. The silence of the historical society felt suddenly oppressive, filled with the ghosts of unanswered questions. He spent the rest of the day poring over the Miller family archives, searching for any other mention of Evelyn, any clue that might shed light on her life after leaving Willow Creek. He found a few brief mentions in old yearbooks, a picture of a younger Evelyn, her eyes holding the same quiet intensity as her sister, Sarah. But nothing more, no indication of where she had gone, what she had done. It was as if she had intentionally erased her past, or at least the parts connected to Willow Creek. As the sun began to set, casting long, mournful shadows across the historical society, Arthur felt a growing certainty. The address wasn't just a nostalgic keepsake. It was a cry for help, a desperate message left by Evelyn, a secret she had carried, perhaps too heavy to bear alone. She had hidden it in plain sight, in a book, knowing that one day, someone might find it and unravel the truth. He left the historical society with a heavy heart and a mind buzzing with possibilities. He had come seeking answers, and he had found them. But they were answers that led to more questions, to a darker, more complex narrative than he could have ever imagined. The quiet, unassuming man who had simply wanted to satisfy a fleeting curiosity was now a reluctant detective, pulled deeper into a mystery that spanned decades. A mystery that held the fate of a family, and perhaps a murderer, within its silent, unforgiving grasp. The road back to Portland felt longer, the familiar landscapes now imbued with a chilling new perspective. The quiet hum of his tires on the asphalt seemed to echo the unspoken screams of the past, beckoning him forward, urging him to continue this terrifying, but undeniably vital, journey. The journey back to Portland was a blur of frantic thoughts and chilling revelations. Arthur couldn't shake the image of Sarah Miller's haunting eyes from the old newspaper clipping. The silence of the historical society had been a deceptive veil, beneath which lay a story of profound loss and lingering injustice. He knew, with a certainty that resonated deep within his bones, that he couldn't abandon this quest. The address, the book, Evelyn Thorne. They were all threads in a tapestry woven with sorrow and secrets, and he, Arthur Penhaligon, the quiet bookseller, had become inextricably entangled in its pattern. He arrived back in Portland late at night, the city lights a blurry mosaic of indifference. The bookstore, his sanctuary, now felt different, imbued with a new, unsettling significance. The first edition of The Great Gatsby sat on his desk, a silent sentinel, its pages holding not just the words of Fitzgerald, but the unspoken truths of a vanished life. Arthur knew he needed more than historical records. He needed to delve into the lives of Evelyn and Sarah Miller, to understand their relationship, the circumstances surrounding Sarah's disappearance, and Evelyn's subsequent silence. He decided his next step would be to contact the local police department in Willow Creek, not with accusations, but with the new information he had gathered. He understood the delicacy of the situation. Cold cases were often closed, and reopening them required compelling new evidence. He had a strong suspicion, A gut feeling, but no concrete proof. Not yet. He found the contact information for the Willow Creek Police Department. His call was met with initial skepticism. Decades had passed. Files were archived. Officers had retired. But when Arthur meticulously laid out his findings, the connection between Evelyn Thorne and Sarah Miller, the address, the book, the unsolved disappearance, a new tone emerged from the other end of the line. Officer Hayes, a veteran detective, listened patiently, his voice shifting from polite dismissal to cautious intrigue. "Mr. Penhaligon," Officer Hayes said, his voice grave, "what you're suggesting, it's a very serious accusation. Thomas Thorne was a person of interest at the time, but without a body, without any evidence, we couldn't proceed. We had our suspicions, but nothing concrete." "What if the book is a clue?" Arthur pressed, explaining his theory about Evelyn leaving the address as a deliberate, albeit cryptic, message. "She kept that book for decades." "Why?" Officer Hayes agreed to look into the archived files, promising to call Arthur back. The wait was excruciating. Days turned into an agonizing week. Arthur felt a knot of anticipation tightening in his stomach, a relentless churning of possibilities. He found himself walking through the bookstore aisles, touching the spines of books, seeking solace in their familiar presence. But his mind was miles away, in a sleepy Ohio town, haunted by the ghost of a vanished woman. Finally, the call came. Officer Hayes's voice was different now, devoid of skepticism, replaced by a quiet intensity. "Mr. Penhaligon," he began, "we reopened Sarah Miller's case files, and based on what you told us about Evelyn Thorne, we found something." Arthur held his breath, his knuckles white as he gripped the phone. In Evelyn Miller's personal effects, which were held by her lawyer Marcus Thorne, we found a small, locked wooden box. Marcus, surprisingly, had never opened it, just stored it. When we presented a warrant, he reluctantly agreed to let us open it. Inside, beneath some old letters, we found a diary. Evelyn's diary. It detailed everything. Arthur's heart leaped. A diary. The missing piece. The voice of Evelyn Thorne, finally unburdened, speaking from beyond the grave. "The diary corroborates your theory, Mr. Penhaligon," Officer Hayes continued, his voice strained. "Evelyn knew. She knew what happened to Sarah. Thomas Thorne. He was a violent man, possessive. Sarah had tried to leave him. There was an altercation at the house, 1724 Whisperwood Lane, the night she disappeared. Evelyn was there. She witnessed it. She described seeing Thomas. She wrote that he snapped. He attacked Sarah. She tried to intervene, but he was too strong. He then carried Sarah out of the house. Evelyn, terrified, ran and hid. She was a young woman, frightened, alone. She believed he had killed her sister. She was too afraid to go to the authorities, afraid of what Thomas might do to her if she spoke up. He threatened her. He told her if she ever breathed a word, she'd be next. She fled Willow Creek, haunted by what she saw, carrying the guilt, the fear, and the truth for her entire life. A profound sorrow washed over Arthur. The weight of Evelyn's secret, carried for decades, was almost unbearable. The book, the address, it wasn't just a memory. It was a desperate attempt to ensure the truth would someday be known. A final act of courage from a woman silenced by fear. "And Thomas Thorne?" Arthur whispered, a tremor in his voice. "His name came up again, Mr. Penhaligon," Officer Hayes revealed, a grim satisfaction in his tone. "After Sarah's disappearance, he drifted. But a few years later, in another state, he was involved in a domestic dispute that turned fatal. He killed another woman. He was caught, convicted, and died in prison a few years ago. He never admitted to Sarah's murder, but the patterns, the timeline, the diary entries, it's all there. We're confident that Thomas Thorne was responsible for Sarah Miller's death. Evelyn's diary provides the final, damning evidence we needed to officially close the case. We'll be releasing a statement soon." Arthur sat in stunned silence, the phone heavy in his hand. The mystery was solved. The truth, buried for over 50 years, had finally surfaced. It was a tragic, heartbreaking truth, but it was a truth nonetheless. Sarah Miller, the young woman with the kind eyes, finally had justice. And Evelyn Thorne, the reclusive old woman, had found a way, even in death, to tell her sister's story. He looked at The Great Gatsby on his desk, its worn cover now imbued with a new, profound meaning. It wasn't just a book. It was a vessel of memory, a silent witness to a family's enduring pain and a sister's unwavering, though long-delayed, act of love. He, Arthur Penhaligon, the quiet bookseller, had become an unwitting participant in a narrative far more dramatic, far more poignant than any fiction. He had started with a simple address, tucked away in an old book, and it had led him to a family, to a tragedy, and ultimately to a quiet kind of redemption. The story of Sarah and Evelyn Miller, a story of love, loss, and the enduring power of truth, deserved to be heard. It was a testament to the fact that even the smallest, most unassuming objects can hold the most profound secrets, waiting for the right person to unlock them. So, if this tale of a hidden address and a decades-old mystery has captivated you, if it sparked a flicker of curiosity about the unseen stories that lie hidden in plain sight, then please consider giving this video a like. Your support helps us bring more compelling, true-life narratives to light. And if you want to be sure you don't miss our next deep dive into the unexpected, the extraordinary, and the truly unbelievable, then hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell. Because you never know what secrets might be waiting to be uncovered, just around the corner, or perhaps tucked away in the pages of an old book.